Ever since the 16th century, when the church was canonizing a saint, a person would be appointed to be the skeptic, or argue against the potential saint. This person was known as the devil's advocate. Today, I will play the part of the devil's advocate. I'm Nick Boratenski.
This is Kyle Hyman here with Nick Boratenski for Devil's Advocate. You ready for this, Nick?
I don't know if I'm really ever ready for these.
Here's the premise of today's conversation, is that we need to be pruning our branches, or another way of saying allowing God to prune our branches. And here's where the analogy is.
I was going to say, are you talking about trimming my beard?
I wasn't going to say anything,
okay,
but since you brought it up.
Okay.
The house that we moved into had 3 apple trees. We're down to 2 now. We killed 1. And what I realized after a couple of years is that you're supposed to be pruning these apple trees because they grow a little bit faster than they should, and the branches get all wiry, and a couple things happen. One, branches will start to overlap and rub against each other and rub the bark off, which allows it to disease. And I don't know what gets in there. Bacteria, viruses, bugs.
Again, kind of like the beard, food gets in there.
Yes, it happens. And so you need to prune so that those branches don't overlap or touch each other. And the other thing is that you can get to a state where I guess the root structure is such that it's drawing in the nutrients for the fruit, but you've got so many buds on this tree that it doesn't have enough nutrients for each piece of fruit. So you get very small or maybe not even edible fruit. So if you prune them, you'll have less fruit, but it'll be better fruit. And so the analogy here is that in our own lives, we can get involved in so many different things, or our parishes might have so many different things going on that we're doing a bunch of things poorly instead of doing a few things really well. And I see this in our families. You know, we're involved with so many different things, with sports and work and family life and church things and community things. And I'm doing a bunch of things poorly instead of trimming back, cutting back and say, all right, I'm going to say no to some of these things. They're good things. It's good to be growing more fruit. But if that fruit isn't going to be fruitful, if it's not going to be good fruit, then it's better that we invest in a few things and do them well than to do a bunch of things poorly. That's my argument.
And my first question, I guess, is do you do that?
No. The moral of this, there should be a disclaimer on this show, like, do as I say, not as I do. Like, these are things I'm striving to, and 90% of the time I am talking to myself with anything that I'm suggesting.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think you're one of the biggest multitaskers I've probably ever seen. I'll come in here and you've got one thing up on one screen, you're editing audio on another screen. I'm like, all right, Kyle, all right, take it a little easier, all right? There's a reason you're starting to lose your hair.
Right, Photoshop and audition at the same time. Right?
But I guess my argument on this one is there are people who are successful with a lot on their plate. It's either because they're just extremely efficient workers and they can get through things very well and very quickly. And there are the multitaskers who are able to do several things at once. And it honestly comes down to, I think, especially today, we have a tough time with attention span. We lose our focus. There's a lot of distractions in the workplace. If we were able to hold our focus a little bit longer, and if we could crack down, focus on what we're doing, we could get a lot more done a lot quicker. And like I said, distractions in the workplace. There's, times where you'll talk to somebody probably about something not work related for 30 minutes to an hour, and you're like, oh, whoops, there's part of the day gone. And you could have been doing work during that time. And there's, like I said, I've seen so many people who are able to juggle so many different things and do so well at all those things. Where is it really more so of a case-by-case basis, do you think?
Well, sure. I mean, there's definitely different levels that people are capable of, but also, if everything is going well, then sure, keep doing it. I think part of the problem, though, will be doing something well. And just take a church, for example, right?
Okay.
If something is working really well, like, oh, well, then we should do this for this other group, or we should also do something else. And so then we take the resources that we have, whether it be the people or finances or whatever, and we split that off. And now the thing that was working really well, it kind of dwindles because we're draining some resources from something that was working. Or we just right out of the bat say, hey, we need to do 10 Bible studies instead of like, let's start with one, see how it goes. And we try to slowly build this up. One of the inspirations for this is John chapter 15, and it's the vine and the branches. It says, I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine grower. He takes away every branch in me that does not bear fruit, and every one that does, he prunes so that it bears more fruit. So I'm not the first to come up with this analogy. Jesus recognized this in John chapter 15. But part of that is a discernment, is letting God tell us what to prune and let God prune our branches, and to say, what are you calling me to? How can I serve? And what are my priorities? So we shouldn't be involved in the parish if it's going to jeopardize our family. Like our family comes first. And we shouldn't be investing in our family if it's taking away from our relationship with God. So maybe we need to make prayer with God a priority over spending time with our family, which is a little tricky because, especially if young kids, they don't understand. Wait 30 minutes while dad finishes his prayer. Like I've got a poopy diaper, and I'm speaking for the kid on this.
I was going to say. I guess when it comes to, you're taking it also kind of in the daily life, almost situation there. And when it comes to that, I feel like the more that you can do with your family and with the community, the better. So not necessarily taking things off, because then honestly, I would get bored if I started taking a lot of these things that are on my plate off my plate. Yeah, I might sleep more, which, sleep when I'm dead. But I also don't have a family yet. So I think that's also where you can kind of bring that into this conversation a little bit better than I could. But even as a kid growing up, we did quite a lot of things as a family. And, my parents were pretty well committed with things, either with church and so forth. And we would normally try and do most of those things as a family to the best of our ability. And I think there's always going to be things that a parent should be doing on their own, that they should have only on their plate, because sometimes you do need that something outside of the family, or that's something with just you and your wife, where, you get a babysitter for the kids or things like that. And so I think it's also very good to have that, especially if it's something within the church. But as far as doing things to the extent that we're struggling with them, or we're not doing them as well as we could, again, I think with modern technology and all the tools that we have today, everything is built for us to be able to do more. And tools are out there to make everything a little bit easier for us. Like the editing software we have nowadays compared to the old days.
Sure, yeah.
Like video editing takes probably half the time, if not more than that. And same with audio editing and any writing, Word documents, things like that. Everything proofreads you. Like you still want to proofread your work. Not saying
Can you imagine
don't do that.
typing a book, like an entire book, on a typewriter?
I'd rather not.
And then you decided like you wanted to add a paragraph somewhere.
And I always remember in college people complaining about having to type up essays. I'm like, do this 30 years ago. You're having to do this on a typewriter. Right. You mess up, guess what? You're restarting. But like just things like that, where modern day tools are also helping us do a lot more efficiently. And so we're able to do more. So that's where I think the pruning necessarily doesn't have to come into place. So I think I'll agree with you in certain areas where pruning does need to take place, but other areas not so much.
Right. So the same is true in actual fruit growing. So if you go to an apple orchard, like a professional apple orchard, their goal is to produce as many apples as possible and as good of apples as possible, right? Good quality and quantity, both, right? And so if you look at their trees, they're not just like one stick with one apple on it, or, two limbs with 4 apples on each limb. Like they're maximizing their potential, but they're still pruning. They're still recognizing that we need to take care of this and not just see how many flowers and buds and apples that we can get, but to be strategic about what we cut off. And you mentioned family. And that really is like another limb of a tree. Yeah. And when you don't have that limb, you do have more opportunities to nurture other apples, if you will.
Yeah.
But once that limb is out there, now you've got to prioritize this limb over the other ones. And the analogy, I think, works out pretty well in that, we do want to stay involved. This is not me saying that you should only do one thing and do it well.
Yeah.
We should still be multitasking. We should still be doing multiple things. We should still be getting involved with our parish. But I think we need to be honest with the fruit that we're producing. Is it good? Could it be better? And what would it take for that to be better? And what is God calling us to? What is God calling us to step away from? And if there are any dead branches, something that's just really either not producing good or even if it's producing negative stuff, then we need to definitely cut that off.
I'll kind of chime in on your side here for a second. You see a lot of the same people being the ones who are doing things at parishes. You'll see one person in like 3 or 4 different ministries and working with the parish office and so forth. And they're also trying to do other things outside of that. So they are the ones that, one, need to kind of try and prune and step back. But that means we need others to step forward and help take up those ministries. And I think those ministries would be able to excel and push forward if we can start to spread that load.
Yeah.
So that is one extent where I'll jump in on your side and kind of call people out and be like, maybe take one thing out of your personal life and put it into the parish and, help relieve the load of someone else. Help them prune their branches.
Agreed. All right. Thank you for joining us, Nick, for Devil's Advocate. Are we on the same page then?
I think I'll have to agree to disagree on this one, Kyle.